morning, Chris. Welcome to the Grow and Connect podcast.
Morning. Glad to be here, Igor.
Great. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I had never intended to become a business owner. In fact, at first, I was actually want to be a music producer. I wanted to work for Motown, but then eventually I went to college into sociology, but I eventually realized I wanted to become a business consultant. And so I figured if I'm going to do that, I shouldn't have real life business experience. So I actually took a sabbatical from college. I said, let's get some real experience versus just getting an MBA and being some, kind of bratty, spoiled kid that comes out think I know everything in college. And so I decided to go out and find some business to do. And the first business I did was becoming a financial advisor. And actually, because I really enjoy being an entrepreneur, I never went back to college. I actually stayed dropped out, never finished that degree. I had one paper to write to finish my degree, and I didn't go back. So I stayed as an entrepreneur. I did that for 4 years as a financial advisor. But then after 4 years, and I remember I was drinking the Kool-Aid, like I believed it wholeheartedly. I was telling people to set it and forget it, save forever, spend nothing, and hopefully someday you'll have something. I was really just a salesman in a suit looking back. And 4 years in, my dad reached out and he said, well, are you going to advise me at some point? Now, my dad was a super penny pinching saver, right? He was the one that taught me to be cheap because my dad would only buy anything. It had to be on sale if he's going to buy it. That's why we had Cap'n Crunch for an entire year straight as kids. And then the next year it switched to Fruity Pebbles, and luckily we went to Cocoa Pebbles the year after that. I mean, it was pretty boring life in that sense. And so I sat down with him and I'm looking at all of his finances for the first time in my life. He's 61 years old. He said, Chris, I've already had heart attacks and strokes. I want out of this job. The stress I think will literally kill me if I don't get out of this job. So I'm looking at his finances. I said, well, Dad, you've definitely saved a lot. You've been saving in your retirement plan like every good boy should. You've paid off all your debt, including your house. You're 100% debt free. You should be the epitome of what I teach, right? You are doing exactly what I teach here. He said, all right, well, what should I do? I said, well, if you try to retire today, you're going to need to die in about 5 or 6 years because that's when you're going to run out of money. What do I do? I don't know, because you did everything right. The best you can do is just keep working and keep saving. And that's exactly what he did until his 70s. And this bothered me because I had spent years telling people, if you just do this methodically, you just keep saving and putting away into these mutual funds and these retirement plans, eventually you'll have financial freedom once you hit your 60s or 70s or whatever, right? And here's my dad, who supposedly had done everything right, and he couldn't retire well. And it was just a month later, I'm talking with a friend of mine who I trained him to be a financial advisor, but then he quit to go do real estate investing. And as we're talking, he said, well, Chris, my dad and I have partnered on some real estate deals, and we've now doubled his income as a professor at the local university. I said, wait, hold on a minute. You just started doing this like 4 or 5 months ago. Come on, that's too good to be true. There's no way that's possible. He said, well, Chris, let me ask you a question. How many of your clients are truly financially free where they don't worry about money? Well, I mean, they all worry about money. Even the retired ones worry they're going to run out of money too soon. Okay, great. Good job, Chris. How about this? How many of you guys as financial advisors are financially free, not off the commissions you've been earning, but actually doing these same investments you've been recommending? And this is in end of 2005. I'm talking with him and I'm looking back. I'm like, well, there's guys been working here since the 1970s. They don't seem like they can retire anytime soon. So maybe it's none. He's like, there's your problem. And over the next few months or so, I'm starting to, take this matrix red pill, learning this whole other avenue of money and investing, more in the space of real estate investing versus stock market stuff. And when I start to see the evidence, when I see that there's lots of these guys in their 20s and 30s financially free doing real estate, where we've been slaving and saving away, including our clients, everything, and they're in their 60s and 70s and they still can't retire, I knew there was a problem. I had to make a choice. Either I stay the path and just put my blinders on like I'm a workhorse and just keep going forward, or I quit and keep my integrity intact. And so I chose the latter. I quit, vowed never to teach about money again. I would just be a mortgage broker and teach ballroom dancing on the side and do a little stock trading. And that's what I was doing in 2006. Although when I started to learn about how to do things with real estate and that I could actually make my money work harder and create more passive income, just like Rich Dad, Poor Dad teaches, but now I was living it. The next thing I know, later that year in 2006, I'm 28, almost 29 years old. I had enough passive income that I could actually retire and quit, which blew my mind. And so 2007 came out of retirement because I was getting bored out of my mind, wondering what to do with my life. Came out of retirement to save people. only to have the recession destroy me almost completely financially. I didn't go bankrupt, but I went over $1 million in debt, had to dig out of that hole where eventually I was able to pivot our business, the new business we had just launched in 2007, almost went bankrupt in the business, pivoted it to the point where finally we're able to pull it back out, eventually build myself back up. I even launched Money Ripples in 2012, which I've been doing for the last 13 plus years. And here we are now, where by 2016, I was financially independent and free the second time. So I actually had enough passive income again that I'm now work optional, where I work because I want to, not because I have to. And that's really what I teach and help people do today is how to help them actually become work optional so that they can create the same thing, not in 30, 40, 50 years, but in like 10 plus years, maybe.
Okay, and so the second time you became financially independent, was real estate investing? Was that the vehicle you did so as well? Okay, so
Yeah. I was just a little bit
and
smarter and wiser this time around because obviously, like when I did it the first time, it was right before the recession hit. Real estate got hit hard, and I was getting lazy with my investing because, when everything's going well, you don't have to be good. You just get lucky, right?
Mhm.
The next time around, I said, no, I got to be wiser and do this the right way. And so that's why it's stuck now for the last, wow. I mean, now you think about it, almost a decade.
Okay, so when you are working with clients, what kind of individuals come to you that you work with? What do you have an ideal client that you work with, or what does the maybe average client look like that comes to you? What's their background? Are they coming from the corporate world?
It's split. It's interesting. I at first it used to be just business owners, like small business owners that were saying, "Hey, I've got this money now. What do I do with it so I can create multiple streams of income?" But now we're getting people from the corporate world as well as saying, "Hey, I actually don't mind my job, or maybe I'd hate my job, but I just want to get to the point where I have enough passive income. I work by choice, not by force. So even if I do choose to work, I feel like I can do it on my own terms." And so we're getting the split there. The common thread, I mean, definitely there's a lot of people like myself that are Gen Xers, right? That we're high income, we make good money, but we're wondering where to put it to get it working harder for us so we can stop working hard for our own money, right? I also get some older millennials too. So it's usually 35 to 59-year-olds that are coming saying, hey, I'm looking for something different. I've seen the path, I see the traditional way that everybody's been doing, and yet so few people are ever really able to live a free life. They live on a life of a budget, a very tight budget when they get to retirement, but not like this free life where I get to choose and live life on my own terms. And those people that are willing to question the status quo, people are saying, yeah, I'm not going to buy into the ordinary. I want an extraordinary life. Those are the people that really, really do follow us.
Okay, and so when someone has that realization that they want something different, that they want to go about things in a different way and not follow the trajectory that they, been on, what's
Yeah, the next steps, I mean, beyond them, like following my podcast, because a lot of people will follow my Money Ripples podcast, and that's how they find us. Beyond that, it's really, I tell them there's three main steps that you take. And I even like just mentioned that in my new book, The Work Optional Blueprint, which just came out on Amazon. In that book, it talks about get lean, get liquid, and get out. So get lean just means be a wise steward of your money. You don't have to live cheap. Don't live on rice and beans, that kind of thing. Don't live a cheap lifestyle like my dad did. You don't have to live super duper cheap, but be a wise steward of your money. Make sure that you are watching what's coming in and going out. So track your money. Two, get liquid means instead of locking your money up in prison like the traditional retirement plans of 401ks and IRAs and locking up by trying to pay off your mortgage, instead, keep that money in your possession, in your control. Don't lock it away from you to where you can't touch it unless you get fired from your job or quit. Neither I usually recommend, right? Instead, get that money in your possession. So that's what it means by get liquid. Whether it's in a simple savings account, we talk about the strategy called max ROI infinite banking that could be used too, but get that money in your possession. And then when it's in your possession, you can then get it out into cash flowing investments. Investments that have a real asset backing up. You're not like gambling, hoping and praying that Bitcoin's going to go up, which it hasn't recently, right? It's gone the opposite direction. You're hoping and praying on the stock market, which could of course tank right before you need it the most. It's like, no, we want to put it in predictable assets, which are things like real estate investing and other alternative investments that people don't even realize they have available to them because financial advisors won't tell them because financial advisors get paid off of what they can sell you, and they legally can't sell you to go into investments that are in Main Street investing. They can only offer you Wall Street options. And so that's where we help them get out into other investments that can actually create real income.
So what kind of investments are these other investments besides real estate, or is that the main one?
Yeah, it's either real estate or they have some kind of backing like real estate. They could be business as well, although business can have some other higher risk, but I like to go with the lower risk type of profile. So for example, real estate's a nice, easy one because real estate tends to hold value much better, right? Not like what you hear in the media when you hear people talking about Austin, Texas, or they're talking about Tampa, Florida, or whatever it might be, where there's like these hot markets, Phoenix, places like that. No, we're going to like the boring markets. But here's the thing. Most people, when they think real estate, they think buying some rental in your backyard. And that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. What we're talking about, there's a variety of investments in real estate, and there's other things too, like oil and gas, business, like I've mentioned. There's other things too. But specifically real estate, there's a lot of these subcategories that people don't realize is available to them that I didn't know about. So for example, yes, you could buy a rental, but the best way, in my opinion, for me, because I'm the person that I realize I'm not a very good property manager, is buy a rental where somebody else manages it. And when somebody else can manage it, you can have a rental in any other part of the country. See, I live in the western half of the US. Rentals out in the western half of the US are horrible. They're a bad idea. But if I go out east, like the Midwest or Southeast, I can get a much more affordable house that still pays higher rents. And so I can make a profit. And so I'll buy what's called turnkey real estate, where turnkey just means that they're a company that says they'll help you find the property. So you don't have to go searching around looking on random MLSs to find it. They already have the properties ready to go, rent ready. They'll also actually fill in the tenants for you. They'll deal with all the paperwork, all the trash, all that kind of stuff, right? They deal with that kind of stuff. You just buy the property, they manage it, and then they send you the checks. So that's like a turnkey real estate property. And
And
that's one example.
are there a lot of those opportunities? And if so, what's the ROI on what does it look like on that versus property where you're doing the management and, taking care of everything?
Yeah, if you take care of everything, I mean, you do save the property management fee, but I'll give you an example. I have a property right now in like Memphis, Tennessee. I've had for the last 8+ years, 9 years, whatever it's been. And that property, I mean, we've had the same property manager on it. They've done a great job. Now they do charge a little over $100 a month, but we still cash flow roughly about $700 a month. So, and that's net profit above and beyond our mortgage payment, taxes, insurance, everything, right? So yeah, they take a piece of it, but the fact that I don't get to deal with anything, that I don't even know who my renter is, right? Like they'll send me the copy of the lease when it's done, but I'm never dealing with the renters. I'm never dealing with that stuff. It's like, it's really kind of, it's more hands off. And that's how I like to invest personally. It's not that you couldn't make more hands on. The truth is you can make more money hands on, but I like to be more legitimately, when I talk about passive income, I want it to actually be a little bit more passive, even though there might be some times I get involved with the property manager. So that's kind of an example there. The returns right now returns on that kind of specific property, you might see like, not including any appreciation, just looking at just the rent, you might make roughly about a 5, maybe 6%, what they call cash on cash return, which is your down payment. What does it produce in actual income? It might be 5 or 6% a year. Now, if you buy it with leverage and there's appreciation too, you get a 4 or 5x multiplier on that money. So let me give you a simple example. Say you buy a property for $200,000, right? Now you put $40,000 down payment on it. Now what happens if that property appreciates by 10%? It goes up from 200 to 220,000. Now your return is not 10%, however, on your money, is it? Because remember, you only put $40,000 down on that property. So when it appreciates $20,000, which you did nothing for it, it just did it. What happens is that now you've actually made a 5x return on that 10%, which is a 50%, because that $40,000 down payment just gained another 20,000 plus the cash flow of the property, which maybe you're seeing at roughly about a $10,000 a year return on that too. So now you're actually seeing this huge, massive return just from those, not including the fact that that the renters are paying down your mortgage for you. That adds another few percent a year as well on top of it, and everything else. So for example, I mean, if I go back to that same Memphis property, I mean, I'm cash flowing well over $8,000 a year net profit on that property. Down payment was 32 grand. So I mean, you do the math. I mean, I'm making 10,000 a year on a 32 grand down payment, right? But on top of it, with all the appreciation and everything else, I've made roughly about a 400% total return. While over that same period of time, the stock market's doubled, right? So I could have doubled my money, but I've made about triple or almost quadruple of that with that same amount of money. And that's the difference. And again, the cash flow is much better too. And I'll tell you, like I said, even right now, it's not that great of cash flow in that area, but it's a definitely a good solid option. Another option that might be better in today's market is lending. And it has been for the last 3 years, because as interest rates went up, of course, profits and rentals went down, but people are still wanting to borrow money. These are real estate investors that either want to buy a property, turn around, fix it up, and then flip it for a higher profit, right? And so this has been going strong for years and years, regardless of what's going on in the markets. Well, in that kind of case, I can make a 10 or 12% rate of return contractually from these guys. I just had somebody recently, a friend of mine, that she said, hey, listen, I'll pay you guys 1% a month to borrow your money. It might be for 3 months. It might be for a full year, just depending on how long it takes to renovate and get that property ready to sell. And then once it sells, then obviously we pay you back then too, pay back your principal. So, that's one thing that I learned firsthand. I went back in 2006. That blew my mind, because when I realized, like, wait a minute, if I had $100,000, I'm making 1% a month. That's $1,000 a month. But in the traditional financial model of, especially with mutual funds, if you're in your 60s, this doesn't even include people that are in their 40s, it's even worse than this. But if you're in your 60s, they only say you should only be pulling out a 3% a year. 4% rule only applies if you're 70 years old or older. 3% if you're 60. So that means if I have 100 grand in a mutual fund, that same 100 grand, I might make $3,000 a year. And then there's no tax advantages. Where I could potentially get tax advantages in real estate, and I can cash flow sometimes up to like $1,000 a month or $12,000 a year. I can make quadruple the money that I'm making in the stock market, just because it pays income consistently, where the stock market does this. And that's why you can only pull out a small amount so you can weather those ups and downs, right? So it's a very different, when I realized that, that's when I started to feel hope. I started to realize, wait a minute, if, and give an example, and this is a real life example here with one of my clients. He was one of the top ranking colonels in the National Guard in California. He retired at 60. He went to his financial advisor. He says, hey, I've got my retirement plan. What can I do with this? And the advisor says, well, you got $1 million in here. You can live on $30,000 a year, right? Which in California is just nothing to live on. And so he eventually heard me on another podcast and then started following the Money Ripples podcast. And then he reached out, started to work with us, one-on-one. And as he did, there's a lot of different opportunities that are out there. Like, he bought a couple duplexes that were rentals. He also did some oil and gas, like I mentioned earlier. Oil and gas, you can get and be involved in business partnerships with that and get paid on the profits of oil and gas. He also did some things in the space of like apartment buildings. You can invest in apartment buildings and self-storage and all kinds of things, commercial buildings, warehouses. I mean, there's so many opportunities like that out there. And so he started to diversify in these different places with his $1 million. And instead of living on $30,000 a year, literally he was earning over $130,000 of income a year on his money. And that's the key difference. That's the thing that really shocks people, is they think, wait a minute, is that too good to be true? And honest answer is no. It's literally just the norm in the real estate space. But once again, because financial advisors don't get paid to tell you to go invest in real estate, because if you put your money in real estate, they stop earning money on your money, right? So therefore, that's why you don't see that be a popular option in the overall financial world, because the Fidelities and the Merrill Lynches don't want you investing outside of what they offer you with their little narrow suite of products.
Okay. Can I ask you, so I was watching, I don't know if you're familiar with Ben Mala. He's a real estate investor. He has a YouTube channel, and I was just, I have family in town for Thanksgiving, and I was watching, hanging out with my cousin, and he's into finance and accounting, and he's a big into investing. And so we were watching the show. He was a guest on the Iced Coffee Hour podcast.
Mm.
And he was saying that right now is not a good time to invest in real estate because there just isn't a lot of deals out there. And is that true? How do you feel about that statement?
You said Ben who? Or is that
Ben
Neil?
Mala, I think
Oh, Ben
is his
Mala. Oh,
name.
I don't know Ben Mala. I know a lot of guys in the real estate space. It depends on what he's talking about and how long ago that aired. Because, for example, multifamily, like apartment buildings and commercial retail space, those ones got kicked in the teeth the last 3 years because the interest rates got jacked up so high that it cut in the way that, how an appraisal on a house is based on pretty much like the value of the land and what you're willing to pay for it. It's different when you're dealing with like retail space, like office space or apartment buildings and things like that, because it's based on not what somebody's willing to pay for it. It's based on what would be your profit if you were to finance it with the bank. So when the interest rates went up so high, obviously the costs that they estimate go up higher too, and therefore the values came down. So yeah, the last 3 years, and actually we had a lot of clients that were saying, hey, this is not looking good. You might want to avoid looking at this area. It doesn't mean that you couldn't make money here, but this is going to get riskier. And it got a lot riskier because the values were really high and then they came down, right? But single family rentals, nothing. Like my single family rentals were just fine. Now, buying single family rentals still aren't like as cash flowing as amazing because the prices and the costs to finance these properties went up faster than the rent payments did. The rents haven't caught up to it yet, right? And they may not. And so that's why you may not see like this, when I bought a property, sometimes you could see a 12 plus, return on just the cash flow alone. And you probably won't see that for a long time. At least in most areas you won't. But what didn't get affected? Warehouses, right? Like Amazon warehouses and stuff, or even just commercial warehouses that people use, and whether they're storing stuff there or whether they're commercial type working out of the building like that, those things, nothing happened. They kept going up just fine. They kept paying just fine. Like I mentioned, like with lending, people are doing, fix and flips and things like that has been working just fine the whole time. So when they say that, is the question I always say is, okay, in what subsector of real estate are they referring to? Because there's so many other sectors that are paying just fine right now. It just means that it rotates, right? There's always a time and a season for different places. I guarantee that, if somebody watches that interview now, the thing is now you're starting to see better opportunities in the apartment space than there were in the last 3 years because the prices have adjusted, everything's come down, people have accepted it, and now it's kind of hitting the bottom. And so right now is almost a better time as long as you find a good operator, somebody who's actually trustworthy, that knows what they're doing, they've been doing it for a long time, and they have a good, consistent track record, right? You find those people that are good operators, and you won't see any kind of stress that way. But yeah, overall, yeah, lots of people lost money. I mean, we've seen Grant Cardone lost a crap load of money in doing bad real estate deals. In fact, almost the bigger the celebrity, the dumber they were when they're investing. We've already heard about guys like Ty Lopez. They got into a nice Ponzi scheme, right, and things like that. That's what
Yes.
almost always happens when you get celebrities starting to promote something. Usually that's when the dumb money goes in, and that's what you got to be afraid of. So this is my advice for anybody who's looking at any kind of investing, not even just real estate, is whatever people tell you to not do, that means it either is the time to do it or it's about to be the time to invest in that thing. Because when people say, don't invest here, and everybody else is fleeing and running away, that's usually when the best opportunities to buy happen in that moment.
Well, that definitely makes sense. I've heard that before. So, okay, so with money ripples, when clients come to you, you sort of sit down with them and you look at what their interests are and, kind of advise them on where to put their money based on their interests or based on what?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, we're not investment advisors. So we're not saying put your money here, put your money there, right? We're not giving recommendations, but we are strategists and connectors. So what we do is we do look at the whole situation. We're looking at somebody's their income and expenses, even the individual different types of expenses. Like where's the money going? Where's the cash flow? Like how can we improve it in different ways? It might just be, especially if they're a business owner, can we help them save 5 to 10 or 30,000 plus dollars a year in tax savings by connecting with a CPA that we recommend people go see, right? It could be, even just how do we pay off debt differently, right? They might have some debts. I had one client that they had $5 million in stocks. They said, hey, we got we're very stock heavy in like Google, Meta, like Facebook and things like that. We probably should diversify a little bit. So we want to get more into real estate investing. But when we first started looking at their situation, we said, well, first and foremost, I mean, we can see where your spending is. And they were making like $50,000 a month of income, but they were spending probably about $40,000, which is not bad. That's still a lot of good money. But when we took out taxes, we said, man, if we could reduce taxes, that'd be a big deal. And literally, they're saving over 30,000 a year after talking to our CPA. Furthermore, I said, hey, look, we can see an opportunity here. Like if we refinance your house, we can actually pay off some of these loans, not all of them, but these specific ones based on our cash flow index debt pay down method that we've used for almost 20 years now. Use that method, and we're able to free up about $3,800 a month. So already, just between taxes and between that and with the savings from the debt, we're already freeing up over $75,000 a year. And then we found out that they had a property, an actual real estate property, but was cash flowing zero. Right? There was zero cash flow, but it had $200,000 of equity. So we're looking at that, saying, wait, there's opportunity here. You have all this equity, but it's not paying you. What if we sold that? What if you sold that property and you invested it somewhere else? Even if you made 10, 12% a year. And so they did. And so already, even without investing any of their stocks, right? Because we weren't talking about selling stocks because we can't tell them to sell stocks. But even before we got there, we found almost $100,000 a year of cash flow to improve their situation. Then it was just a matter of, okay, hey, here's some opportunities. Here's some different deals. Like if you're looking for, different real estate stuff there, because people are always going to ask me, hey, Chris, where do you have your money? And I always remind them that it doesn't matter where I have my money, because no one person or situation that we've dealt with has ever been the same, right? They always have different preferences and different things they want to do. Everybody's a unique situation. That's why you can't just group coach all these people and say, here you go have fun. Here's all the people I've invested with. Good luck. What if I wouldn't invest with them again, right? Those kind of things. So instead we try to say, based on what your situation is and your goals, do you want cash flow now, or you just want to grow your money? Because there could be different strategies that work better for different things. For example, I'm in a raw land partnership, right? Where these guys are buying and selling raw land using my cash. And in that partnership in 4 years, I've invested a little over $500,000, but it's now cash flowing almost $13,000 a month, right? I mean, so a lot of people are saying like, hey, should I do that? I'm like, well, depends. Are you looking for cash flow today? Yes. Okay, well, that one takes time to build up. Do you want to be that patient, or would you want to do something else, right? And so those kind of things, we kind of weigh those options to figure out like, what is your good kind of recipe? And so I don't get paid from any of those people they go invest with, right? Unlike financial advisors get paid whatever they tell you to go into, we don't do that. We get paid by the client, but then if they go talk to different people that we've vetted, that I know that are usually have a better reputation, doesn't mean it's guaranteed, but they have a better reputation. As they talk to those people, they can come back to us and ask us, because we work for the client, not for the people that they're trying to put their money with, right? And so they can ask us and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking as I'm looking at these people. Any thoughts, anything I'm missing that I may not be seeing, any risks or anything like that. So we look at the pros and cons and eventually help them create a game plan to figure out what they're going to do to where they can deploy their money, and then figure out from there how to eventually get to that goal where they can become work optional.
It's like, you're working with the client and seeing what every person needs. What would you say to, those individuals that perhaps are running a small business or are still in the corporate world? They may not have the time to really invest into learning about real estate or really diving into a specific niche of real estate or the type of investing, because their time doesn't allow for that. How do you work with them in that case?
That's exactly why they hire us, right? Because they don't have to like do what I did, which is spend the last 20 years finding out who would be the people I would invest with and finding it all on my own, right? That's why they want that help, that assistance. That's why they don't want to figure out how to do it on their own. And that's why they don't want to become people that are like landlords. They don't want to be people that are like having to take those calls at 3 a.m. because some issue happens with the apartment, right? Or whatever it might be. That's why you look for more passive type investments. And so the people that we usually work with are the busy professionals or entrepreneurs. They're saying, hey, like I want passive income, but I want to be more of a hands-off investor versus a very hands-on. And so that's what we focus on.
So can you tell us a little bit more about money ripples? If someone comes to you, for example, through your podcast, someone is interested in working with you, can you just walk us through the different programs or, what you guys offer?
Yeah, we really only do two things. We do one-on-one coaching, like we mentioned before here, but the work optional blueprint is the process, we call it, that we take people through. And then we also do what's called max ROI infinite banking, which is a specific financial strategy of one, you can hold your money in savings. That's a tax-free high yield savings account, but you can also use it to earn money in two places at the same time. And so people usually come to us for one of those things. Now, if they're looking for the work optional side, they say, hey, what we've been talking about in this podcast, I want to figure out how to get my money working harder so I don't have to work so hard for that money. Well, the first step they would do is they would go to moneyripples.com, and there's actually a work optional calculator that they can find out just by putting in a few of their numbers. They can pretty accurately discover how much passive income is possible in their situation that they could create in the next 12 months. And so that's what that calculator is for. If that calculator has a decent number, especially if it's like over 15, say 20,000 a year that comes up, then they probably do want to talk to us about, let's see what it would look like working one-on-one with us, right? Because then we would know we would make them more money than what it costs them to be in the part of the program, depending on what level they come in at. So the calculator actually is the thing that helps pre-qualify them for us, because I don't want to take anybody else on that can't get results, right? If there's any warning signs at all, that's why we have such a high, like you look at Google reviews, you're like, okay, is there a bad review here? No, because we only take people on that we can really ensure that they're going to have that kind of success, right? I can't say guarantee, obviously, but it's one of those things where we try to minimize our risk as much as we can so that we're only working with people that will get results. And that's not just on the financial side, that's even from an emotional side, right? Because you could have all the money. I had a guy that was like from 5 years ago, back in 2020, he had $900,000 just sitting in cash. But then once we started to work together, he wouldn't do anything. He didn't want to invest. He didn't want to do anything. He didn't want to let go of that cash, which is like, wait, this is the opposite of what our conversation was when we worked together. Why would you even hire me if you aren't going to do anything, you know? And so finally, that was like my one like partial refund that I gave in the last 5 years because it was just, it just wasn't happening. But he did do the other strategy that we talk about, max ROI infinite banking, which is using life insurance, but using it in a way to store cash, one for emergencies, but then two, it's also a great place to store cash to also invest into cash flowing deals to then make extra interest along the way. So not only you're making money from the investment, but you're also making money inside the insurance at the same time because that money's being invested. And so we get a lot of people, especially that watch our YouTube channel, that will find our infinite banking videos and they go down that rabbit hole, find us, and find out we've got the best, highest returning infinite banking policies that are around. So that's where we get a lot of our clients from as well.
So it sounds like, anyone listening should really check out Money Ripples and the calculator and all the resources and the videos that you have available there. Can you tell us about maybe one or two clients that you worked with that, opposite to the person that came in and didn't want to, invest their money, but maybe a couple of really success stories that you were able to really help someone out by, helping them through the process?
Yeah, there's a lot. I'll use one that he had a hard time breaking away from that saver, Dave Ramsey kind of mentality. He was very much the penny pinching saver as well, just like my dad, just like I was raised to be. He was very much in that mind. And it's amazing because I get a lot of Asian clients and they're like some of the best savers in the world, right? And it's actually not that hard to get them to an investor mindset, more that what I call a steward mindset. You just got to get them to break away from hoarding money, right? And so he was no exception. He was one of those people raised that same way: save everything you can, pay off all your debt. And in particular with his situation, not only was he saving money, but he had two properties. One was his own home that he lived in, and another was a rental property he had for years. And he told me, he's like, Chris, I have a 6-year plan because I've calculated it. He's like, I'm going to aggressively pay off both my mortgages, so I'll be 100% debt free in 6 years. I said, all right, well, let's, not factoring in taxes and insurance because you still have to pay that even when you're debt free, right? I'm like, what's just the principal and interest payments that you're paying on? We calculated it. It's $4,200 a month. Here's the problem though. He had well over $1 million of total equity between all of his properties. And especially in his one rental property, he had about $700,000 of equity in that property. And I said, okay, what's the net cash flow on this? $200 a month. I said, do you realize you could sell that property, take out that 700,000, put it in a CD and make more money than you're making right now? And I'm not saying you do that, but that's pretty sad. Like you're making a 0.3% return on your equity. I said, what if we sold that property and then we tax-free exchange so there wouldn't be any taxes paid? You move all the equity into different properties out east. And I planted that seed in him, and it took 2 years for him to finally accept it. 2 years later, he finally did it. His wife and him were like, okay, we got to do this. And so they did. Luckily, the market appreciated. So now he had like $800,000 to work with, right? Well, that $800,000 went to 6 different properties in Louisiana. Those properties, right from day one, were cash flowing over $6,000 a month. So he went from $200 a month to $6,000 a month, just like I told him. I even told him, I was like, listen, if you make 10% on these, you'll make about $70,000 a year. Here he is making over $70,000 a year. Well, now just last year, he emailed me. He says, hey, Chris, I'm going to give you an update. By the way, this year would have been the year he finally paid off his debt, freeing up a whopping $4,200, right? He says, now I've actually got to where we're cash flowing over $100,000 a year because I've taken the money that we've had and reinvested and bought some more properties. So he's actually at the point where he has over $100,000 a year, over $8,000 a month coming in from his rentals. Not $200 a month, and definitely not. It would have been $2,400 a month with that one property would have paid off. He's almost debt free on his own mortgage too, right? But now he's got more cash to pay it off if he wanted to. So that's one example there. Another example, I had a woman that hired us, and she had about $600,000 to work with, but she did diversify. She did some things in oil and gas space, did some things in different types of real estate and various things. And again, she was working hard, but just it wasn't working. She had zero income coming from her property. Well, now she just got to the point she passed the $6,000 a month threshold, which was her goal to become financially independent. So rather than taking literally decades, she was predicted before she would finally hit the financial independence of $70,000 plus a year that she needed, She did it in just 2 years, right? Again, results may vary. More recent one, this guy is about to hire us. I talked with him, and he's like the stereotypical soon to be retiree that I run into, 59 and a half years old, right? So he's starting to wonder what do I do with these retirement accounts, because he's got 2.1 million between his retirement and his wife's retirement accounts. Yet he's like, Chris, I can't retire. I talked to my Vanguard financial advisor, and the Vanguard financial advisor tells me that he won't even give me an answer because he won't say anything. He won't tell me when I can stop working. He's like, it's not that I can't work till I'm 70. I just don't want to have to work till I'm 70. He's like, if you know what I mean. I say, yeah, I totally know what you mean, because you sound like every one of our other clients. And so he's like, yeah, but what do I do? And I was like, okay, what else do you got? I got a real estate property. I'm making $300 a month off of it, but he's got 800,000 of equity in that property, in that same kind of situation, right? And I told him, I said, what's your goal? Like, how much income do you want? He's like, I want $200,000 a year. I said, well, that's why the Vanguard advisor won't tell you, because you have to have about $7 million, not 2.1 million in these retirement accounts, $7 million saved up to hit that 200,000 a year. So either one, he doesn't know because he's an idiot, or two, he doesn't want to tell you because you have to triple your money in the next 10 years, hoping and praying the market doesn't go down, which it's overdue to do, by the way, in the meantime, in the process. And he's like, oh, that just pisses me off. I'm like, I know. I was like, but here's what's crazy. 2.1 million. What if you were to invest that? And a lot of our deals usually pay at least 10% a year. What if all of a sudden you put that 2.1 million and earned 10% a year? How much are you earning? 210,000 a year. What's your goal? 200,000 a year. Bingo. It's either one, you hope and pray in the next 11 years that the market smiles on you the right way, that you're going to finally be able to live on that when you're 70, or you can get this accomplished in the next year. Oh, and by the way, that property, we got that money out too. We could probably net cash flow at least another 60,000 plus a year better than what you're making right now. So we could probably get you over $250,000 a year conservatively on your money in the next year. I mean, that's the kind of difference that, again, he goes from like feeling hopeless talking to his financial advisor to all of a sudden saying, wait a minute, this could be done faster? And the answer is yes.
Okay. Thank you for telling us about, those success stories that you've come across with your clients, and thank you for coming on our show. So if someone is looking to get in touch with you, they'll go to Money Ripples and find all the information there, and they'll be able to contact you as well as needed. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep. MoneyRipples.com, Money Ripples Podcast, or at Money Ripples on social media.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for coming on the show.
Appreciate your time, Igor. Thanks.